Please note, this episode discusses mature themes. Thank you for listening. Here's a tale about how my life was flipped upside down. Let me take a moment to sit back, relax, and tell you how I became the Sundance Kid. I want to share a story with you, a story that is as much my reality as it is my journey. In 1993, my Nicaraguan Mexican-American family left the bustling streets of Los Angeles and moved to white-ass Park City, Utah. This marked the beginning of a new life, one that now feels eerily similar to my present life. The journey I want to take you on is stranger than fiction, where crime and the world's most renowned film festival have coexisted around me since childhood. It's a story of how Sundance, true crime, and even Ted Bundy have shaped my existence, and why I'm finally ready to open the doors to my humble beginnings. This is True Crime in Hollywood, Celene's Personal Tale, Part 3. If you're not familiar with my story, I've shared bits and pieces in previous personal tales. But let me tell you, my childhood was nothing short of extraordinary, rooted in a world of wealth and status that my family had no connection to. My dad's job moved us to a small town in Utah, and going from sunny playgrounds to snow-covered ones was a huge adjustment. For some context, Park City used to be a sleepy ski town tucked away in the stunning Wasatch Mountains. Not to sound like a total elder millennial, but when we first arrived, there was one grocery store, one main highway, and a whole lot of snow. I have two very vivid memories of our arrival. The first happened when we went to the grocery store, only to find a man lying on the ground outside with a woman frantically screaming above him. We didn't realize he had just been shot. To this day, my family still talks about that moment. I remember my mom commenting that we had just left the crime-ridden streets of LA, but it seemed that violence had followed us. That moment stuck with me. It was the first time I saw crime with my own eyes. I was 6 years old. Then on another trip to the grocery store, my parents got excited because they spotted none other than Tom Hanks sifting through the produce. Since I was already deep into pop culture, I knew exactly who he was. But I was so shy, I did everything I could to avoid eye contact. I was convinced he'd notice me looking and think I was weird. But sure enough, he smiled, waved, and said, "Hello," in the iconic Hanks kind of way. I couldn't believe it. An actor just casually hanging out at my local grocery store? What kind of place was this? Growing up in a predominantly white state didn't faze me until I got to college. Being white passing, I never really experienced racism growing up, and I now realize that my town was actually fairly progressive and, quite frankly, liberal. While my family struggled to adjust to our new environment, I quickly embraced it. My educational experience was drastically different from those outside of Park City, and the privilege I had was immense. But as I got older, I would learn how much people really disliked Park City and the kids who came from there. Looking back, I can totally see why. But there was one thing that set me apart from others: having the Sundance Film Festival in my backyard every January. Sundance started in Salt Lake City in August 1978 as the Utah U.S. Film Festival to attract more filmmakers to the state. In 1981, the festival moved to Park City, Utah, where it remains today, but only for one more year. The 1990s were a transformative decade for Sundance, and it exploded in popularity, becoming the it festival to attend, especially with films coming out of their program that reached new heights of fame, from viral hits to Oscar-winning masterpieces. And then, of course, there's Bob, Robert Redford. He founded the Sundance Institute in 1981, taking over the festival in 1985 and renaming it the United States Film Festival. It wasn't until 1991 that it became known as the Sundance Film Festival. Sundance was the name of Redford's character in the 1969 film Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. The first time I really took notice of Sundance was in the late 90s and early 2000s. Why, you ask? Well, I was a teenage girl completely in love with NSYNC. What millennial teen wasn't? Word got out that they'd be attending the festival, so my friends and I decided to head to Main Street after school and on weekends to try and catch a glimpse of them. I was on a mission, and I actually had some success. I met Lance Bass, nearly hyperventilated, and then totally forgot to ask for a picture. But I wasn't just lucky with Lance. Over the years, I was fortunate to meet the likes of Jennifer Aniston, Kerry Washington, DMX, the original Bennifer, Julia Stiles, Joseph Gordon-Levitt, and the list goes on and on. By the time I hit high school, things got even more exciting during school hours. The Eccles Theater was connected to our school, so we'd sometimes hang out by the windows hoping to spot any celebrities attending these screenings. The only person I clearly remember seeing? Justin Timberlake. Wild times. But let me pause for a moment and talk about an aptitude test I took my freshman year of high school. Now, I'll be honest. I wasn't exactly a model student, and I realize now that it was due to being undiagnosed with ADHD, as well as living through some pretty extreme trauma. Schoolwork was tough for me. So when I had to take this test to figure out what colleges might accept me despite my iffy academic history and where my hobbies, sports, and skills could thrive, I was determined to see the results and that number one school listed. And guess what it was? Florida State University. To be clear, I grew up in an era when the internet was still in its early stages, so I knew nothing about serial killers, let alone the name Ted Bundy and his association with Florida State University. As I've mentioned before, the crime that hit too close to home for me was Elizabeth Smart, which occurred later in my high school years. These two stories would become more significant in my life in 2016, but more on that later. By the time I was applying to colleges, I was determined to go to Florida State University no matter what. As a cheerleader and dancer, I was drawn to the South and the football culture given my deep interest in sports. However, my plans hit a roadblock when my parents were set on me attending the University of Utah like my siblings had, along with Ted Bundy. So I ultimately went that route. The only memento I have from that time is an old application I never submitted to be considered for the FSU cheer squad. I still keep it as a reminder of a dream that never came to fruition, but in my heart, that dream will always hold a special place. So why is this important? Let's fast forward a bit. But before I dive into all of that, I want to take a moment to honor and hold space for Callie. She was a big part of this love for Fest from 2008 all the way through 2012. While I was still a little intimidated by Sundance, my first love, music, was something I could fully embrace. I had the chance to see some of the biggest hip-hop artists like Common, Big Boy, Nas, Pharrell, NERD, the list goes on. Hell, even Mary J. Blige crashed into me on the floor, grabbed my arms, and said, "Sorry, baby," in the most iconic Mary way. Definitely a memory I'll never forget. But Callie was my ride or die through those years, and we would rally for those tickets when they were announced and drive all the way to Main Street to go to these shows. And honestly, it was just so dope to be part of Fest, but in this particular fashion. I'm so happy we got to share our own Fest memories. Miss you so much, Boof. All right, now where was I? The next time I heard the name Ted Bundy was in 2012. I was working as a paralegal at a personal injury firm and living on my own for the first time in the Avs of Salt Lake City. BuzzFeed's true crime articles were starting to gain traction, and I noticed Bundy's name popping up more often. A few of my coworkers and I bonded over our shared interest in true crime. It felt almost like a guilty pleasure, something we were a little ashamed of, yet found ourselves discussing at length. We'd chat about ongoing cases in Utah, like the Susan Powell disappearance and the criminal activities of Warren Jeffs. Then one day, someone casually mentioned that I lived just 1 block away from Bundy's old apartment. Now here's the thing about Ted Bundy and Utah. If you bring up his name around any local, they'll have a story to tell. Everyone has a tale. Maybe it's from their mother, a friend, or some family legend passed down through generations that feels strangely real to the people of Utah. At the time, I didn't know much about Bundy, so I decided to Google him and see what came up. To my surprise, I found out there was even a ghost tour in Salt Lake dedicated to his time here. Since it was close to Halloween, I told my friends Amanda and Brooke, and we bought our tickets, eager to experience this eerie adventure. By the time the tour rolled around, I had a decent grasp of who Bundy was, but his presence in the city became much clearer as the evening wore on. Our final stop was a little unsettling. There was a rundown cabin at the base of Emigration Canyon in Salt Lake, and local folklore claimed Bundy had either hung out there, possibly even a dumping ground, and better yet, where he would perform satanic rituals. While I found no concrete evidence of this during my own research, the rumor is still out there. So I'm here to say I'm squashing that right now. Now back to the last stop. My ex and I stepped off the bus and I suddenly froze. A wave of panic literally rushing through me. Since childhood, I've had an uncanny ability to sense energies around me. I know it sounds a bit woo-woo, but I've been clinically diagnosed as an empath, and it made me realize just how much I actually absorb emotionally. When I visit places marked by tragedy, I often feel the weight of that energy. My first real experience with this was at the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. Later, I visited Ellis Island and nearly had a panic attack from the violent energy I felt there. Being raised in a culture that firmly believes in the paranormal, I'm no stranger to the idea that certain places carry an emotional or spiritual charge. So when I felt that overwhelming wave of panic at the cabin, I knew it was my time to get back on the bus. My ex was understanding and quickly ushered me back. Fortunately, he already knew about my ability to feel energies, and honestly, he was pretty whatever about it. But that moment still made an impact on me. Let's fast forward to 2015. I've said it before, but that year was one of the hardest of my life. However, the beginning of that year marked something familiar. The start of fest season, which would become my January ritual from then on. As I've mentioned before, I took a class at the University of Utah dedicated entirely to the Sundance Film Festival. We had to pay an additional fee, and part of the requirement was attending 8 films. Our final project was to write critiques of the films we had seen. Now keep in mind, I attended my first film back in 2010. It was Winter's Bone, directed by Deborah Granick, and I was completely blown away. But here's the other thing about me. I became a huge fan of independent film thanks to my sister Cindy. In my senior year of high school, she flat out told me, "All right, I need to culture your ass, so when it comes to film, you're coming with me to these screenings at the library and we'll see what you think." Well, of course, I fell in love. That was when I was first introduced to Gael Garcia Bernal and my first real documentary, Rise, directed by David LaChapelle. The film told the origin story of crumping, a street dance genre that emerged in Los Angeles in the early 2000s. It was fascinating to see how this powerful form of expression was born from the streets of LA, where the dance became a way for people to release pent-up emotion and energy in the face of hardship. What I didn't realize at the time was that Cindy was opening my eyes to the power of storytelling and what it truly means to be an artist. As I've shared before, Art has been my escape during the darkest of days, and falling in love with indie films at 18 is what ultimately brought me to where I am today, at almost 38 years old. My passion for documentaries led me to declare my major in speech communications with an emphasis in intercultural studies. Not only was I learning how to speak publicly, but I was also captivated by how we communicate as a society, especially within different subcultures, and how we can foster unity in a country that feels so divided. But the reality is, we are divided. I previously mentioned that Paris is Burning was the documentary that opened my eyes to the world of ballroom culture. I also spent time studying whacking when I worked at Millennium Dance Complex and completely fell in love with that movement. I hope you can see why now Renaissance is such an important album to me. It speaks to all of this. So let it be known that during my time in college, I was immersed in studying documentaries and different cultures, and I absolutely loved it. But I also started giving speeches about some real heavy topics. My first speech? Ghosts. Yeah, you heard me. Ghosts. Like straight up paranormal. Casper looking ass ghosts. But it didn't stop there. I soon found myself giving speeches on the Rwandan genocide, Tupac's philosophy and belief system surrounding thug life, and why it was so important for marginalized communities in LA. Mi gente. There were 3 speeches in college that hold a special place in my heart because trauma is woven into history, and history, as we know, repeats itself. The first election I ever voted in was in 2008 for Barack Obama, and I cast my vote right on my college campus in this deep-ass red state. So when I say that election played a pivotal role in my college career, sit all the way down. I gave a speech about the way the media portrays women in politics, focusing on Hillary Clinton and Sarah Palin. I got so emotional during that speech and blurted out, "Sorry, I don't know why I'm crying. I fucking hate Sarah Palin." But what that moment really showed me was how much I cared about the way society continuously degrades women. It's not like we just saw it happen in November. The second speech was for a culture and history class, and my final presentation was about September 11th, with a focus on Jose, my brother-in-law's experience that day as a student at New York University. This was one of my first interviews I ever conducted, and sharing his emotional story with my class was incredibly moving. It felt so important to give people a glimpse into what life was like on that day, especially as college students ourselves, with each of us reflecting on where we were when the world changed. It really became the gateway to where I am today. Thank you for allowing me to share your story, Jose. Love you. And last but not least, I mentioned this speech in an off-script episode with John Michael. It was for a culture and gender class. We were assigned to give a speech about who we were and how the gender construct manifested in our own lives. As someone who loved hip-hop and speaking my truth, I crafted more of a slam poetry style speech where I came out to my class as a sexual assault survivor. I'm not sure if I mentioned it happened on campus or not, but the applause and cheers from my classmates and professor will stay with me for a lifetime. And that moment came full circle when this past November, I was invited to share my story for the first time in front of present-day students at Lauren's Lap on behalf of the Lauren McCluskey Foundation. Recently, I stumbled upon an article written by a student who commented on my speech, and it left me absolutely speechless. I'm beyond honored in so many ways when it comes to this moment, being able to give back to my alma mater and share something so personal in front of those students meant more to me than I can even express. The reason I'm sharing this is so you can understand that I have been on this journey, whether I realize it or not, when it comes to storytelling, especially when it comes with nuanced ideas and concepts. I think I've always wanted to tackle trauma in a way that moves people, and I knew I wanted to communicate with the world, though it took me some time to figure it out and how to actually get there. Now, all of this to say, I found myself in this Sundance class, tickets in hand, and Fest 2015 really marked my introduction to indie film. So there I was in Park City and Salt Lake, bouncing from screening to screening. I vividly remember watching The Bronze, In Football We Trust, It Follows, and my first real documentary about sex work, Hot Girls Wanted. As I sat there watching these films, I couldn't help but notice that many of the filmmakers didn't have fancy film degrees. They were just people chasing a dream. It's a dream that feels so unattainable when you first start in this industry, and it instantly hooked me. That's when I realized I wanted to become a documentary filmmaker. I can even remember the exact moment it clicked, driving back down the canyon, processing everything, and knowing I had to sit with that realization for a little bit longer. To this day, one of my favorite things about post-Fest are the films that come out over the years that I didn't get to see. The sad truth is that there are films that never find distribution, and it's heartbreaking to think about all the creatives from around the world who pour their hearts and souls into their films only to be left in the dust. It's really a tough pill to swallow. So, there was one film I did watch post-Fest that really, really stood out to me. Kurt Cobain, Montage of Heck, directed by Brett Morgen. I remember this screening was completely sold out during Fest, so I never even tried to see it, being a newbie. Kurt Cobain is one of my major feminist heroes, and Nirvana is my favorite band of all time, so I had been eagerly anticipating this doc. What Brett Morgen created in this documentary laid the foundation for what would eventually become Theodore. If you're not familiar with this doc, Morgan spent countless hours going through Kurt's personal belongings, from his drawings and notebooks of lyrics to audio tapes of Kurt discussing his childhood. It's one of the most intimate portraits of Cobain alongside the Museum of Pop Culture in Seattle. I remember reading an interview with Morgan where he talked about how during the edit and filming, he could feel Kurt's spirit and energy, right down to the moments he struggled with a cut. I remember thinking, how do you handle someone's most intimate belongings and then interpret them for the rest of the world to consume? I was fascinated. 2 years later, it became a disturbing reality for me. As I navigated the ebbs and flows of 2015, 28 felt like 40. But throughout it all, I couldn't stop thinking about art and what I wanted to do with it. By the fall of that year, I decided to apply to volunteer for Fest. As I've mentioned before, that's when I received the call to join the documentary film program as an office assistant. And once again, I found myself asking, who are these angels in my life and what did I do to deserve such a gift? Fast forward to Fest 2016. By this time, I was working at a different law firm, hating every minute of it. I was the only woman in the office, completely drowning in depression and trauma. When Fest came around, I had no idea what to expect. My first shift, my first volunteer party, and then my first P&I screening. I remember showing up to the party with a friend I had just made on Facebook. Yes, sketchy, I know. It didn't hit me until people started asking about my volunteer position that I realized I was in a special category. I was asked, who did you suck off to get this position? Who do you know at Sundance? Why were you picked? I immediately felt awful, but I had to remind myself that most of the people in this room were either already in the industry or desperately trying to break in. Though I felt shame at the time, I eventually learned to own it as I moved forward. By the time my first shift began, it was a beautiful, cold, snowy winter day in PC. I made my way to the office, filled with anticipation. As I looked around at the small space, I could hardly believe where I was sitting. My role involved helping check in the fellows and alumni of the DFP, and I was surrounded by events and networking opportunities happening at all times. It was overwhelming, but in the best way possible, and I loved every second of it. Not to mention, this was during the era when Tabitha Jackson was the director of the DFP, alongside the incredibly talented Kristen Feely. From aspiring filmmakers to well-known industry veterans, the diversity of talent was staggering. One filmmaker who stood out to me was Yance Ford, whom I had the honor and privilege of meeting at a few fests through the DFP. It's been so inspiring to watch their career blossom in real time. That's one of the greatest things about Sundance. You get to witness filmmakers evolve and refine their craft year after year. And the representation of BIPOC, LGBTQ, and queer communities at Sundance is something I hold near and dear to my heart. Seeing these voices celebrated year after year continues to be one of the most rewarding parts of Fest. But let's talk about the films for a second, because just thinking about them brings me to tears. I had the honor of screening some of my favorites, like The Haulers by John Krasinski, or Life Animated by Roger Ross Williams. But it was the last screening, Kim A. Snyder's Newtown. Newtown chronicled the aftermath of the devastating 2012 mass shooting at Sandy Hook Elementary School in Newtown, Connecticut, where 20 children and 6 educators lost their lives. The film dives into the lives of the survivors, those who were forever changed by that horrific event. I watched this film with my second mama, Nicole Fielding, and I'm so grateful we experienced it together. The cold open is one of the most chilling and heartbreaking portrayals of the ongoing tragedies of this country. Kim's ability to collaborate with trauma survivors is evident, and it's clear in the depth of this documentary. I knew for a fact that both Newtown and Under the Gun would tear me apart, but I felt compelled to understand what happened that day and how to continue honoring those children, the educators, and the law enforcement who had to endure such an unimaginable scene. After the screening, I had the chance to speak with one of the mothers, and that conversation forever changed me. I witnessed a level of maternal pain that I had never known, and it broke me. This screening is one of those moments that will stick with me for a lifetime. Shortly after I wrapped Fest, I quit my job, packed up my mother-in-law apartment, and moved into my new one, a space I was lucky enough to call my home for many years until I got married. But during this time, I was living my best life in an apartment on 400 South facing north where I could watch the sparkly lights from the Avs. I was in love with this apartment. It was mine, completely free from any trauma. It felt like a fresh start. But boy, did I fuck that up about a year later. Right after Fest, I quickly realized I needed to get on set and start learning what it truly means to be a filmmaker. So I began Googling opportunities and signed up to become a background actor. My first major background project was Mosaic, directed by Steven Soderbergh, and I know I've mentioned this before, but I still can't believe that actually happened. As I slowly but surely started booking gigs, it became clear that I couldn't survive on the low pay or the instability of this kind of work. So I went back to the drawing board while waiting to reapply as a volunteer for Next Fest. A couple months later, I received the devastating news that one of my dear friends and Parkites had tragically been killed in a vehicular homicide. Mandy Strait was one of my best Zumba students, and I loved watching her dance through vibrations because she was also deaf. This was the first time I had ever encountered the word homicide, and it came to me in the most devastating ways. Mandy's case would also be the first that I would attend in court, facing the man who took her from this world far too soon. My heart wasn't prepared for the overwhelming sadness that has lingered ever since. Miss you so much, my dear friend. Keep on dancing, Mandy. As I navigated where I was in life, trying to figure out my career, goals, and battling my depression, I felt the need to find some kind of inspiration. Reflecting on my experience at the Newtown screening, I became curious about the stories that make headlines. The first book I picked up was My Story by Elizabeth Smart. As I sat there listening to Elizabeth share her truth, I couldn't help but feel a deep connection to her story. The places she spoke of were just blocks away from my apartment, and the day Elizabeth went missing marked the moment I stopped sleeping with my window open, something I didn't do again until recent years. Hearing Elizabeth speak, telling her story in her own words, woke me up to the power of owning your trauma, of allowing yourself to be vulnerable in front of the world with the potential to help others in the process. At that moment, I realized I needed to learn more about crimes committed against women, and truthfully, my own assault had been lingering in the back of my mind. But I hadn't fully acknowledged that I was, in fact, a rape survivor. But that's when I became brave and decided to listen to The Stranger Beside Me. The Stranger Beside Me, written by Anne Rule in 1980, mixes autobiographical and biographical elements to tell the story of Theodore Robert Bundy, someone she knew personally before and after his arrest for the series of murders he committed against women and children. There was one part of the book that left me with so many questions about how someone could turn into something so fucking evil and vile. I learned that day Theodore and Anne met when he worked at a suicide hotline in Seattle during the 70s. I would later find out that he was really good at his job. He was even up for a promotion to, I want to say, a manager position. So how the hell did this guy go from that to becoming one of the most notorious serial killers in the country? It just didn't make sense, and I hated that I never got an answer to that question, at least during that time. After finishing the book, I went to my friends Amanda and Brooke, who are twin sisters with a very deep knowledge of Bundy's crimes. We decided to rent an adaptation of Anne's book, and honestly, we couldn't believe how inaccurate it was. But let's be real. True crime adaptations back then were all about exploitation and sensationalism. I knew it then, and I absolutely know it now. As the credits rolled and the popcorn bowls were empty, I turned to them and joked, or so I thought, that one day I'd make a documentary about Ted Bundy and really show the world who this guy was. We all laughed, thinking it was the biggest pipe dream ever, something that would never come true. As the year went on, my newfound interest in true crime deepened, and I began learning about the cases that had haunted me as a child. About a month before Fest 2017 kicked off, I was hit head-on by a drunk driver in downtown SLC. It had only been 9 months since Mandy's life was taken by another drunk driver. I started feeling an overwhelming sense of survivor's guilt. By the time the festival rolled around, I needed it more than ever. Eagerly awaiting my first shift at the DFP office for my second year, I thought I'd have a more fulfilling experience now that I understood how the festival worked. One thing I have to shout out is how Sundance showers their volunteers with so much care and appreciation. It's something that often goes unnoticed by the outside world, so shout out to Brian and his team over the years. But one of my favorite parts of being a volunteer was experiencing the volunteer screenings the night before Fest. It was a back-to-back screening and nobody knew which films we'd be seeing. So I had never heard of Brian Fogel before this fest, but his name is now unforgettable. The announcement was made that we would be the first people to ever see Icarus. Yes, the Oscar-winning documentary Icarus. Fogel came to the front of the room and shared that he'd just finished the final edit 15 minutes before we sat down. While I don't remember his exact words, it was something along the lines of, "If you felt like the 2016 election was rigged, this should answer your questions." And in that exact moment, I realized this was what it truly meant to be a documentarian, especially when focusing on major crimes. My brain absolutely exploded. Now, I'm not gonna lie, I am a little biased when it comes to Sundance's programs, and this particular year is one of my absolute favorites. But there's one film in this particular fest that opened my eyes a little bigger and woke up a creative note in my heart. Kitty Green's casting JonBenet. But before I get into that, something happened midway during Fest in the DFP office. As I mentioned, people were coming in and out of our office at all times, whether they were checking in, saying hello, bringing delicious food, or trying to track down Kristen Feely. It was just a lot of commotion at all times. But one early evening, my fellow volunteer and friend, Cy Banks, was sitting next to me, and we both had just shared with each other that we wanted to be documentary filmmakers, and it was a bond from the jump. So in walks one of the DFP associates and a director, and they are enjoying a fruitful conversation. Then the director asks if we are filmmakers or if we had any interest in becoming one. Cy went first and shared her dreams and goals. Hell yeah, girl. I'm still so proud of you for that. Then the question turned to me, and I fumbled a bit and said, yeah, I do. And naturally, they asked, what would you make a doc about if you could? I panicked. I knew the answer, but that was just a joke between the twins and I. That's not real. That can't be my idea. Or can it? Yeah, I think Ted Bundy. Their eyes widened. Go on. Well, I read this book last year and found out he worked at a suicide hotline, and I can't wrap my brain around that, so I'd love to meet people who knew him, but also their lives being impacted by him. By this point, I thought it sounded like a green leafy word salad that was going nowhere. But by the time I was finished, they were standing closer to the desk, both looking at me, like, what the hell are you doing? The director looks me in the eye and says, start tomorrow. Start tomorrow. What's your name again? Celene Calderon. Celene, start tomorrow. I don't care if you have to shoot this thing on your phone, but do not wait. You already have a conceptualized idea, so go for it. Okay, but I don't know how to make a film and where to start. The conversation continues for another 5-10 minutes or so. By the end, Cy and I are looking at each other like, whoa. Cy agreed that I had to listen to them. I had to start tomorrow. So I fucking did. Where this story goes next is reserved for another time. However, I will say, you have never, ever seen a true crime documentary like this one, let alone about America's golden boy when it comes to prolific serial killers. Ted, or as I like to call him, the name he fucking hated to be called. Theodore Robert Bundy. Theodore, to me, was a figment of my imagination turned reality. Because this is just the beginning of my story with this project, previously known as Theodore. I know this project was brought to many people through the voices and women behind my favorite murder. When I say this project changed my life forever, it's in the best, worst, and darkest of my days. It is no shock to the world that I made many mistakes in front of the public during those early years, and I will own those mistakes for you to understand why they were made in the first place. Theodore has been my life for over 8 years now. Any creative knows what that actually means, because when you embody your project, your film, your dream, that's what rules your life. My life has been turned upside down, and just barely am I finding the courage, my voice, my vision, my artistry, my ability to do the damn thing and create an educational piece while I share the deepest of my secrets, stories, and personal belongings of Ted motherfucking Bundy's. Yes, you heard me correctly, Theodore Robert Bundy's belongings. That I have touched, that I have read, that I have held onto in terms of the trauma it brought on. When Brett Morgen said Kurt Cobain was around him during Montage of Heck, guess which motherfucker has been around me very heavily in those early years? In fact, I'm still unpacking that shit currently in therapy. Theodore Robert Bundy wasn't just a serial killer. He was someone that was a compassionate friend to a dear friend of mine. This beautiful human recently passed away, Mary Lynn Chino, and her story and experience changed the way I saw Theodore when it came to the human side of him. When I say this journey has fucked with my head, consider this me fucking screaming. I promise every single one of you listening that all of this will make sense one day. And the last thing I'm going to say about Theodore, the project that needed to be killed. One day, you will see exactly why this project has taken the life out of me more than once in terms of secondhand trauma, the media, breaking my silence, Watergate, Rolling Stone, My Favorite Murder, all fucking of it. All of it is connected. I received the best advice of my career from producer Dave Lawrence. Dave said to my team and I in 2017, making a film is really, really hard. It's going to drain you, test you, and will be what you think about all the time, so just be ready, Celene. Dave wasn't wrong. Making a film is really fucking hard. Money, time, travel, all of it. It's been a 2-person gig on the road this whole time. Timothy John Saris was my number 2 for years, and what we went through will impact us for the rest of our lives. This film is not what you think it is. Film and art right now, in this current administration, we need everything we can get, okay? Because every day feels like gloom and doom, but what I know is this. We are Americans, and we need to be talking to each other. And if there is one person who can bring America together for 2 fucking seconds, that is going to be motherfucking Theodore Robert Bundy. I hate that I even have to say that and actually say that on a fucking podcast. Thank you, Grace McNally, for that line. I am so fucking sick of this country defending con artists and murderers and rapists, and frankly, this is no different. Why do we as a country hold certain killers to a higher standard when it comes to someone like Theodore Robert Bundy? Now, I'm just ranting, so I'll end that there. So back to casting JonBenet. After my conversation with the director and associate, I knew I had to watch this film. If you haven't seen it yet, do yourself a favor and please check it out. You can find it on Netflix, and honestly, this documentary completely caught me off guard. I couldn't stop thinking about it. It's one of the most thought-provoking true crime docs I've ever watched, but it's more of a hybrid film than anything else. Kitty Green absolutely nailed it for me. Mainly because I had never seen a true crime doc done like this before. As I mentioned in my first personal story, JonBenét's case has stuck with me since childhood. So being able to watch this film at the start of my journey as a filmmaker and in true crime was truly a gift. After the 2017 Sundance Film Festival, I came back to the DFP for 2018 and finally wrapped up my volunteering run after Fest 2019. Over those 2 years, I had the chance to experience some pretty amazing films. One highlight was attending the world premiere of Won't You Be My Neighbor by Morgan Neville, which had absolutely everyone in the room in tears. That memory will always remind me that there are helpers out there, and we need to keep that in mind as we move forward as a country. Oh, and I also went to the world premiere of Extremely Wicked, Shockingly Evil, and Vile by Mr. Joe Berlinger, but I'll circle back to that when the time is right. Getting to screen Apollo 11 by Todd Douglas Miller in 2019 was something really special, because what I didn't know at the time, that film would end up having a wild full circle moment between Sundance, NASA, and me. More on that shortly. But I also can't skip over 2 documentaries that really stuck with me. Shirkers by Sandy Tan hit a bit too close to home, especially with my second year in independent filmmaking. It felt a little too familiar, but again, more on that later. Then there was Ursula Macfarlane's groundbreaking doc about the survivors of Harvey Weinstein. Watching it for the first time in January of 2019, I had no idea it would foreshadow me breaking my silence about my alma mater months later. That screening left me with a heavy heart, and the dark side of the industry started to feel more real in the post-Me Too era. But I didn't know how close I was to having to break my silence again, but this time in the industry, as you probably already know. Ending my volunteer run in 2019 was the best decision I could have made. Things were finally clicking in my brain when it came to filmmaking, but then came the trauma that started to resurface as I watched these films. I began to see patterns, and let's just say it wasn't pretty. Just a month before Fest started, I got the call I feared most. My beloved friend and big brother Fua was taken too soon, once again in a tragic vehicular homicide. Another drunk driver in Salt Lake City. My world came to a halt, because why did this keep happening? If there's ever a reason to stop and reconsider getting behind the wheel, please listen to me. It's just not worth it. Fua had been such a strong supporter of my journey as a young, independent filmmaker. I know he's up there cheering me on as I continue to chase this wacky dream. Miss you so much, Fui. By the time Sundance 2020 rolled around, I decided to return, but this time as a box office agent at PCBO, aka the Park City Box Office. That's where I met some of my dearest friends today, along with more filmmakers, artists, and colleagues from all over the world. Working at the box office only deepened my love for Fest, and I loved connecting with people from all walks of life about the films they were excited to see. And let me just say, 2020 was the year of Miss Americana and Palm Springs. Those 2 films definitely left a lasting impression on every box office agent that year. On top of that, I earned the reputation as the doc expert on my team. Some of my colleagues even got to see me totally geek out when I met Brian Fogel during my shift. I was able to articulate how much I appreciated his film and his bravery. It was a special moment. I'm probably one of the nerdiest documentarians out there because I'll happily geek out over directors all day long. But it wouldn't be a Fest conversation without talking about the films, because this particular program hit me very, very hard. Let's start with Into the Deep directed by Emma Sullivan, which I've already shared the full story of in my last personal tale. This was the first film I saw at Fest that year, and the moment I shared with Emma validated my feelings about investigative journalism. Next, I was lucky enough to attend the world premiere of Us Kids by Kim A. Snyder, a collaboration with the survivors of the Parkland shooting. I brought my second mama, Mama Coley again, along with me. Kim's direction in this film was profound, especially in her approach to collaboration and consent with survivors of one of the greatest tragedies this country has ever fucking seen. After that screening, I gathered the courage to thank Kim for her ethical storytelling and told her she was a hero of mine. I'm incredibly proud of Kim for championing these survivors, and it's amazing to see how much she continues to do. Recently, I learned Kim directed and produced a short film with Parkland survivor Sam Fuentes called Death by Numbers, which has been nominated for an Academy Award. I can't think of a more deserving team, and the way Kim sticks to her ethics in true crime storytelling is truly admirable. Thank you, Kim. And also shout out David Hogg for sharing this tidbit over the last couple of days. Proud of all the work you are doing on behalf of gun violence survivors. Thank you, David. Then one chilly evening, I managed to snag a ticket to On the Record by Kirby Dick and Amy Ziering. Drew Dixon is a former A&R executive who played a significant role in the music industry, particularly in hip-hop and R&B during the 90s and early 2000s. She worked for prominent labels like Def Jam, where she helped discover and work with some of the biggest names in hip-hop, including Method Man, Missy Elliott, Bone Thugs, and even Biggie. Drew's talent for identifying potential in artists and her deep understanding of the genre contributed to the success of many iconic albums. The albums that have scratches on scratches for how often they were played in my home growing up. See, that's the thing about young Latinos like my parents having kids in the 80s and just vibing out to some of the greatest music ever played, including many songs and albums that Drew was behind. I was in awe learning her story, and I'm so glad I did. Drew's career took a more personal turn when she became one of the survivors who publicly accused hip-hop mogul Russell Simmons of sexual assault. Her story is central to On the Record, which focuses on her and other women of color who have come forward with their own experiences of sexual violence in the music industry. Drew's bravery in speaking out despite the powerful forces at play in the entertainment world has made her a pivotal figure in both the Me Too movement and the conversation about racial and gender inequality within the music industry. Her background as a trailblazing executive in hip-hop adds a powerful layer of complexity to her personal tale. If you couldn't tell, Drew is one of my absolute heroes, and I am so thankful we connected 5 years ago. She is a woman whose brilliance and intelligence are so underrated, and I honestly believe more people need to hear from her. The reason we connected is that I could relate to the feelings and turmoil she experienced before choosing to break her silence in the media. Even though I did it on a smaller local scale, during that time, it doesn't lessen the re-traumatization that happens every single time you share your story. Your body is the crime scene, and it never forgets. After seeing On the Record, I felt compelled to reach out to Drew and let her know my thoughts. Her film profoundly impacted me. It was transformative to watch such powerful women share their truth. I was in awe of their courage, and I'm grateful for the filmmakers for doing the right thing by amplifying their voices. Drew, thank you for everything you are doing for survivors everywhere. You are doing more than people even realize. Now, a friend had an extra ticket to Promising Young Woman, directed by Emerald Fennell, a film I wasn't too familiar with, since I was always hopping from dock to dock. But based on the description, it sounded pretty pro-femme, so I decided to check it out. And oh boy. As you could imagine, I loved this film and this particular experience. Because even though I had no trigger warning or much knowledge going in that this would be a film about rape happening on campus and a lot of themes that paralleled my real story. So watching this was cathartic and confusing at the same time. But it filled me with a new kind of rage, and it made me feel all the emotions that Cassie goes through in this film. So going from on the record into PYW, yeah, I was going through some shit. Then last but not least, Liz Garbus's feature directorial debut Lost Girls premiered at the Eccles Theater in Park City. Liz Garbus. Where do I even start? In our household, we have a joke, and it's that it always comes back to Liz Garbus. Liz Garbus is unreal in so many ways when it comes to her creative and her vision, which immediately caught my attention. But there's also a personal connection between Liz and me, particularly because someone involved in I'll Be Gone in the Dark later became my abuser, or as most people know him, Billy Jensen. But without going on another Billy spiel, I just want it to be known. The way that documentary tackled rape and the injustices faced by survivors from decades ago will stay with me forever. It was both eye-opening and fulfilling to see the history of things we are still grappling with today. While it saddens me that one of her projects is tied to this person, it doesn't take away from the incredible impact and strength Liz brings to her projects. So I just want to make myself clear on all of that. But here I am at my last screening of 2020 at the premiere of Lost Girls, which follows Mary Gilbert, played by Academy Award nominee Amy Ryan, after her daughter disappears. Frustrated by the police's lack of action, Mary takes matters into her own hands, launching her own investigation into the gated Long Island community where Shannon was last seen. Her search uncovers the stories of over a dozen murdered sex workers, and Mary is determined to ensure that the world never forgets them. As a flashback to my previous tale, I was presented Renee Bergeron's case a year prior to seeing this film, so seeing sex workers being humanized meant the world to me, and then some. We need to be talking more about crimes against sex workers, especially marginalized sex workers, because the system ranking when it comes to victims is completely disgusting. So I applaud Liz and her team for making this film, and then, of course, the son of a bitch finally gets caught and is finally arrested. Some people might be more familiar with the story under the Long Island serial killer, aka Lisk. So again, Liz, chef's kiss on that one, because that's how we need to move the needle in terms of victims and ethical storytelling when it comes to sex workers. Thank you for your vision. We need them. Well, barely a month and a half after Fest, COVID hit and lockdown began. I anxiously awaited to see what would come of Fest because I knew I already wanted to return. Sundance went virtual for 2021 and 2022, later becoming a hybrid event. Once I heard that Fest would be virtual, I knew I had to be there. It felt like my journey into the industry was finally unfolding, and then mere months later in 2021, Rebecca's sermons brought me on board to work in Santa Monica once a week at Conveyor Media. Yes, I flew to LA every Wednesday for work, and honestly, it was a blast. Between these two virtual fests, I probably watched over 40 films, marking my introduction to more feature films and expanding my horizons. By 2023, I decided to stay virtual with my job. The reason I wanted to stay virtual was because not only was I a wife now to Duncan, but I was pregnant with our daughter, Lourdes, during that fest. My heart swelled as I shared the fest experience with my little family. Sundance has always been a big theme in our household, and it felt extra special that year. As a high-risk pregnant woman, I was mindful of the films I screened that year to keep stress levels low. But even though I was trying to stay comfortable in my seat while feeling my baby kick, I wouldn't trade this experience for anything. Then 2024 rolled around. The fest that truly woke up the filmmaker inside of me. I kicked off fest with Girl State and then ended it with Daughters, both of which left me in tears. It was my 9th fest and something clicked in my brain creatively. At the time, I was producing How I Escaped My Cult, and as my producing career gained momentum, watching all these brilliant films made me feel like imposter syndrome finally took a backseat. I was able to explore what I could do, not only with my own doc, but also for others, other trauma survivors like me. 2024 marked a turning point where I began viewing my work through a more vulnerable lens. In just 24 hours, the world will see the docuseries that paved the way for this very podcast. How I Escaped My Cult will be available on Freeform and on Hulu the next day. But as a trauma survivor, filmmaker, producer, and podcast host, I have watched over 130 films during my time here at Sundance. It's what I like to call Sundance University, my personal education from the past 10 fests. These films are the stories that will be discussed for years to come, and being part of that is like being in an exclusive club where you get to see the best of the best before anyone else. The constant texts and calls from people asking about my favorites post-fest always makes me smile. But then came the unexpected during the early months of fall of 2024. I get a call from NASA Plus asking me about Sundance. As I've shared, Rebecca Sermons, director of NASA Plus, has been a champion of mine since day one. She is my sister in this journey, and it was time for me to introduce Sundance to NASA. If you had told me last fest that I would be speaking with NASA and the Department of Justice before the year was over, I wouldn't have believed you. No way. But the unthinkable happened. Time went on and Sundance and NASA Plus became partners. The first event held was You Bet Your Asteroid, NASA Has a Story to Tell, and I had never stepped foot into Filmmaker Lounge until then. Watching Rebecca give a speech that not only honored her team, but also acknowledged the tragedies and the fires Los Angeles had faced was so inspiring. I am so proud of the incredible human she's become, and it's federal workers like Rebecca that honor and protect this country. Please remember that, and please hold space for them. So needless to say, that moment really was something special. Sitting in the audience, soaking it all in, I couldn't believe this is where I was leaving Sundance. And needless to say, the films this year were on point. Being able to be at the world premiere of Celene y los Dinos, directed by Isabel Castro, was a rite of passage and frankly, every Latina's dream that particular night. But if you remember how impactful Selena's death was to me as a child, I got to have this moment and be one of the first people in the entire world who could finally see who Celene was. I've never been so excited for a doc to premiere post-fest because what Isabel made and the collaboration with the Quintanilla and Perez family was a trust and a bond that I'm very familiar with. I also just want to remind the world before watching this doc, Selena's family are still trauma survivors at the end of the day. What they chose to share with the world will make you fall in love with her more than you probably already are. It is the greatest gift that her familia could give to us. And their pain, trauma, story, and healing journey deserve the utmost respect too. So please remember that. Then I received an invite to attend the Alfred Sloan Award Party for Christina Costantini's latest doc, Sally. A doc all about the amazing Sally ride. So obviously NASA was a hella theme for me this year. But what's wild is that I remember attending Christina's first doc here at Fest, which was science fair, and once again was a volunteer screening. Then I would get to experience her second doc feature here at Sundance, which was Mucho, Mucho Amor. And I can't even get into what that film means to me because I will just be a blubbering mess by the end. But Sally was truly one of my absolute favorite films of Fest this year. See, that's the beauty of Sundance University. I've watched these filmmakers grow and blossom into these innovative, empathetic, thoughtful visionaries and truly ignite a spark within me. Once again, I cannot wait for the world to see Sally and get to know her a little bit better. But for real, Latinas being represented at Fest is one of my absolute favorite things. So with that, this past Fest was one that I never could have envisioned in my mind because it still feels like it was all a dream. This is my life, reality, and journey as an indie filmmaker. If you couldn't tell by now, Sundance means more to me than just a film festival. I will never know how I got to be so lucky in those early years because I attribute a lot of my growth as a human, creative, and activist within my time here at the Institute. Another beautiful moment came the day before Fest began when I was honored to be interviewed for Al Jazeera English's series The Stream, and specifically discussing ethics in true crime. I am still in awe of it because, to be honest, this is truly a career milestone, and I know I need to do a better job of recognizing and celebrating these moments. But I can't end this episode without addressing my dear friends at the Institute. There are so many to name, and I want to highlight some of those day oneers and the familia we've created over the years. So to Jeff, Annie, Hillary, Elise, Julia, Patrick, Felix, Crystal, Amelia, Rebecca, Orly, Nicole, Brian, Sierra, Hannah, Quinny, Nick, Nishita, Duncan, Sai, Sam, Melissa, Cassidy, Jenna, Bree, SK, Jesse, Isabel, and so many more. As I've shared before, filmmaking is easy. It's getting the film made that is the hardest part. As an indie filmmaker, my journey is unique, but what sets it apart are the parallels that have shaped me and opened my eyes to so much more than I could ever imagined. I take immense pride in my time with Sundance because I understand the dedication it takes to bring this festival to life. It's the people from all walks of life who share a passion for independent film that truly make it special. Thank you to the Sundance Institute for having me. I just hope I can make you proud one day, because even though I received a denial letter for a grant I applied with for Sundance this particular evening as I'm recording, it didn't faze me. Why? Because this is my road to Sundance. And like any road trip, unexpected bumps are just part of the journey. And if Brian Fogel taught me anything, I've got to edit up until the last 15 minutes before y'all listen to this episode. I love you, Sundance. Thank you for everything. And last but not least, I want to highlight one last major blessing, my fiscal sponsor, Creative Visions, founded by the incredible, unstoppable Kathy Eldon. Kathy is a trauma survivor, filmmaker, producer, writer, activist, and simply one of the most beautiful human beings I have encountered in this journey. Kathy's home and Creative Visions were among the few structures left standing on Pacific Coast Highway after the devastation of the Palisades fire. Kathy and her team have always believed in the power of creative activism, and now, more than ever, that's what we need. We need art. We need conversations. And above all, we need to support one another during this fucking administration. It is so important that we continue uplifting the voices that need to be heard, and those are the people who are suffering at the hands of this administration. Please continue to support those creatives in your lives. So with that, Kathy, thank you for always being in my corner and so many others. You are a true hero. Not just to me, but to everyone impacted by these fires and across LA. Your strength, love, and dedication inspire me every single day. Thank you, my dear Kathy, for taking care of my home away from home. If you feel called to support Creative Visions, including my work with Killing Theodore, please find the link in this episode's summary. Every donation, big or small, truly makes a difference, and together we can continue amplifying meaningful change. Thank you for your support. Well, that's a wrap for me now, folks. Just know that you will be hearing more from me very soon, because I'm on a mission, and it's one to foster a more empathetic, informed, and compassionate approach to true crime storytelling. This means prioritizing trauma-informed practices, safe sets, and mental health protections for everyone involved. You are the reason we can make a difference. Let's continue to champion ethics in true crime, whether we are creating it or consuming it, because together, we can make it fucking happen. Thank you again for listening, and as always, remember the victims and embrace the survivors.